The withered corpse upon the golden throne draws breath through machinery older than most civilizations. For 10,000 years, the Emperor of Mankind has endured in this state between life and death, sustained only by the sacrifice of 1,000 psykers each day, and the archaeotech that keeps his fragmented consciousness tethered to his failing body. The golden throne itself groans with age, its systems degrading despite the desperate ministrations of the Adeptus Mechanicus. They can maintain what remains, but the knowledge to truly repair the ancient device has been lost to time. Each century brings new failures, new workarounds, new prayers whispered over dying systems. The clock ticks toward an inevitable conclusion that will reshape the galaxy. When the Emperor falls, the first casualty will be navigation itself. The Astronomicon, that great psychic beacon blazing from Terra through the Immaterium, requires the Emperor's unfathomable psychic might to function. This lighthouse in the warp guides every navigator in the Imperium as they steer their vessels through the roiling madness of the Empyrean. Without it, humanity's interstellar empire faces immediate and catastrophic collapse. The beam extends roughly 50,000 light-years from Terra, though its strength varies depending on warp conditions. Beyond that range, ships must make shorter, more perilous jumps, guided only by the navigator's own skill and experience. When the Astronomicon dies with its creator, even that limited navigation becomes impossible across most of the galaxy. The navigators themselves will feel the Emperor's death as a psychic shockwave. Their third eye, that organ which allows them to perceive the currents of the warp, will suddenly find itself staring into absolute darkness. Ships in transit through the Immaterium at the moment of his death face terrible fates. Some will simply be lost, unable to find their way back to real space, doomed to drift through the warp until their Geller fields fail and demons pour through to claim the screaming crew. Others might emerge from the warp thousands of light-years from their intended destination, or centuries off their proper time, deposited into systems they have no maps for, no way to reach help from, no hope of ever returning home. The most fortunate will simply be destroyed outright, consumed by warp storms or torn apart by the sudden turbulence caused by the Emperor's passing. Terra itself faces an even more immediate threat. Deep beneath the Imperial Palace, sealed behind wards of psychic power and physical fortification, lies the breach in the Webway. When Magnus the Red attempted to warn the Emperor of Horus's betrayal, he tore through the carefully constructed tunnel the Emperor had been building into the Elder's ancient network of faster-than-light passages. That catastrophic mistake opened a wound between real space and the warp directly beneath humanity's throne world. Demons poured through by the millions during the Horus Heresy, held back only by the Emperor's constant vigil from the Golden Throne and the endless sacrifice of Custodes and Sisters of Silence who fought to contain the breach. For 10,000 years, the Emperor has maintained that seal through sheer psychic force. His presence on the Golden Throne serves dual purpose, both powering the Astronomicon and keeping closed the gate that would otherwise allow the warp to spill directly onto Terra. When he dies, that seal breaks. The Webway breach becomes an eruption point for demonic incursion on a scale that makes the original catastrophe seem tame by comparison. The Imperial Palace, that monument to human achievement spanning continents, becomes ground zero for a new Eye of Terror. The demons waiting on the other side of that barrier have had 10 millennia to gather their strength, to plan their assault, to fantasize about the moment when the anathema's protection finally fails. The Adeptus Custodes know this reality better than any other force in the Imperium. They have fought the war in the Webway. They have stood guard over the sealed breach for 10,000 years. They have contingency plans for what must be done when the seal fails. Those plans involve mass evacuation of the throne world if possible, the deployment of every available warrior to contain the demonic tide, and likely the activation of ancient weapon systems held in reserve for this precise scenario. But even the 10,000, the Emperor's own companions, the greatest warriors humanity has ever produced, cannot hold back the infinite hordes of chaos indefinitely. They can buy time for evacuation, time for other forces to rally, time for the Imperium to attempt some kind of coordinated response. But Terra will fall. The loss of the throne world carries implications beyond the tactical. Terra is not merely the administrative center of the Imperium. It is the spiritual heart of humanity's vast domain, the birthplace of the species, the site of the Emperor's palace, the destination of countless pilgrims who save their entire lives for the chance to see Holy Terra with their own eyes before they die. The psychological impact of its fall to chaos forces cannot be overstated. Across the Imperium, faith in the Emperor's protection will shatter. The ecclesiarchy will fracture into competing interpretations of what the emperor's death means. Some will preach that he has ascended to full godhood and will return in glory. Others will claim this is the final judgment, that humanity failed its divine test and now faces extinction as punishment. Still, others will lose faith entirely, their entire worldview collapsing as the one absolute truth they believed in proves mortal after all. The practical machinery of imperial governance will suffer immediate breakdown. The administratum relies on Terra as its central processing hub. Tithes, fleet movements, resource allocation, military deployments, all of this information flows through Terra for coordination and distribution. When the throne world falls, that coordination ends. Individual sector governors will find themselves suddenly autonomous, cut off from higher authority, forced to make decisions they were never trained or empowered to make. Some will rise to the challenge, forming regional confederations and mutual defense pacts. Others will succumb to paranoia, hoarding resources, refusing to aid neighboring systems even as they fall one by one to various threats. The most opportunistic will simply declare themselves independent warlords and begin carving out petty kingdoms from the Imperium's corpse. The Adeptus Astartes face their own crisis of purpose. Every Space Marine chapter swears oaths to the Emperor personally. They are his angels of death, his vengeance made manifest, his chosen warriors in a hostile galaxy. When he dies, those oaths take on different meaning. Some chapters will interpret their duty as requiring them to fight harder than ever, to honour the Emperor's sacrifice by continuing his work of protecting humanity against all threats. The Ultramarines and their successors will likely attempt to maintain some form of order, using the Codex Astartes as a foundation for continued operation, even without the central authority of Terra. Other chapters, particularly those of less stable gene seed or more idiosyncratic traditions, may experience doctrinal schisms. Without the Emperor's living presence to serve as ultimate arbiter, old disputes about interpretation of the Codex, about proper gene seed usage, about which threats should take priority, all of these debates will erupt into open conflict. The Mechanicus of Mars presents its own complications. The Treaty of Mars, signed during the earliest days of the Great Crusade, bound the priests of the machine god to the Emperor's service in exchange for autonomy over technological matters. With the Emperor dead, the validity of that treaty becomes questionable. Some Forge worlds will continue to honour their obligations out of pragmatism or genuine faith in the Omnissiah. Others will view the Emperor's death as releasing them from all obligations to the Imperium. The most radical tech priests might even see opportunity in the chaos, chance to pursue forbidden research without oversight, to explore technologies long banned by the Mechanicus orthodoxy. Mars itself could fracture into competing factions, each claiming to represent the true interpretation of the Omnissiah's will, each pursuing different technological philosophies, some of which might seem dangerously close to innovation. Astropaths present another cascading failure point. These sanctioned psychers maintain the Imperium's long-range communication network, sending messages through the warp in defiance of its dangers. The Emperor himself soul-binds each astropath in a ceremony that both empowers them and protects them from the worst predations of chaos. His psychic presence provides a measure of defense even after the binding ceremony concludes. When he dies, that protection dies with him. Astropaths across the galaxy will suddenly find themselves vulnerable to demonic possession and warp predation on a scale they have never experienced. The more powerful among them might resist through force of will and training. The weaker will fall immediately, their minds torn open by entities that have been waiting for exactly this moment of vulnerability. The astropathic network that keeps the Imperium functioning as a coherent entity will go silent within weeks of the Emperor's death, leaving individual worlds isolated not just physically, but informationally. The Imperial Guard faces perhaps the most immediate practical challenges. These are not superhuman warriors like the Astartes, or psychically gifted individuals like the Astropaths. They are ordinary humans, equipped with standard weaponry, trained to fight in the Emperor's name and supported by a logistics network spanning the galaxy. When that network collapses, when the ships bringing reinforcements and supplies can no longer navigate safely, when the astropaths coordinating multi-theatre campaigns go silent or mad, the Guard will find itself scattered across 1 million worlds with no way to coordinate their efforts. Individual regiments will fall back on their training and regimental traditions, but without resupply, without reinforcement, without intelligence about what their fellow regiments are doing or where the enemy forces are concentrating, they will be whittled down through attrition. Some regiments will survive by going native, settling on whatever world they happen to be stationed on and becoming its de facto military government. Others will maintain their discipline and their mission even unto death, fighting to the last soldier because that is what the Emperor's soldiers do. The common citizens of the Imperium, the uncounted trillions living on hive worlds and agri-worlds and forge worlds and fortress worlds, will experience the Emperor's death as a slowly unfolding catastrophe. At first, nothing changes. They wake up, they go to their work assignments, they eat their corpse starch rations, they offer their prayers to the Emperor before sleep. But gradually they notice things. The food shipments become irregular, then scarce, then stop entirely. The Arbits who maintained order become preoccupied with other matters, or simply disappear. The PDF forces that garrison their world receive no new equipment, no replacement parts, no fresh recruits to replace casualties. The priests of the ecclesiarchy begin preaching with increasing desperation, their sermons taking on apocalyptic tones. The streets fill with self-flagellating penitent mobs convinced the end times have arrived. Different worlds will respond to this collapse in different ways depending on their local circumstances and cultures. Worlds with strong planetary governments and substantial local resources might weather the storm relatively intact, becoming isolated but stable holdouts in an increasingly chaotic galaxy. Worlds dependent on imports for basic necessities will descend into starvation and anarchy within months. Hive worlds, those massive city planets where billions live stacked in our colleges kilometers high, will become death traps as their life support systems fail and their food supplies run out. The resulting riots and mass die-offs will make the Horus heresy look merciful by comparison. Forge worlds might fare better thanks to their technical capabilities, but they too will suffer as raw materials stop arriving and they must choose between maintaining their own infrastructure and fulfilling their obligations to supply the greater Imperium. This is the cascade of immediate consequences from the Emperor's death, but these are merely the opening moves in a larger game, the first dominoes falling in a chain reaction that will ultimately reshape the galaxy. The Imperium of Man, that vast sprawling empire of 1,000,000 worlds, will not survive intact. It cannot survive intact when the very mechanisms holding it together, the Astronomicon, the Astropathic Network, the Authority of Terror, all cease to function simultaneously. Yet within this catastrophe, other forces will move. The Emperor's death does not occur in a vacuum. The Chaos Gods watch with interest from the warp, seeking opportunity in humanity's weakness. The Xenos races of the galaxy, long held in check by Imperial might, will sense vulnerability and move to exploit it. And perhaps most importantly, there remains the question of what happens to the Emperor himself. His body may die. His presence on the Golden Throne may end. But his soul, his vast psychic essence accumulated over 40,000 years of existence, does not simply dissipate into nothing. The Starchild waits in the warp, that fragment of the Emperor's compassion and humanity that he cast aside when he struck down Horus. The Sensei, his scattered immortal descendants, move through the galaxy unseen even by his own forces. The Illuminati, that secret cabal of individuals who have faced chaos and survived, pursue their own mysterious agenda regarding the Emperor's future. All of these forces have waited millennia for this moment. The Emperor's death is not an ending, it is a transformation. What emerges from that transformation, whether it will be salvation or damnation for humanity, remains to be seen. The Xenos powers of the galaxy will not remain passive observers to the Emperor's death. Each has waited millennia for this moment, whether they knew it consciously or not. The fall of humanity's greatest protector represents opportunity on a scale unseen since the birth of Slaanesh tore the Eldari Empire apart. Yet opportunity carries its own dangers, for in the chaos following the Emperor's death no race will find itself entirely safe from the consequences. The Eldari have foreseen this moment through countless visions and prophecies. Their Farseers have walked the strands of fate for 10,000 years, tracing out the myriad possibilities that branch from the Emperor's eventual death. Some see salvation in humanity's fall, believing that the collapse of the Imperium will draw chaos attention away from the remaining craft worlds and the nascent Inari movement. Others perceive only greater danger, recognizing that humanity, for all its flaws and xenophobia, has served as a bulwark against the ruinous power's expansion. With that bulwark removed, chaos will spread unchecked, consuming Eldari and human worlds alike in its insatiable hunger. The Inari present the most radical Eldari response to the Emperor's death. This faction believes in awakening Inyad, the god of the dead, through the collection of souls from across the Eldari diaspora. They have theorized that the Emperor's death might provide the catalyst they need, a psychic shockwave of sufficient magnitude to fully birth their deity into consciousness. Some Inari prophets claim to have seen visions of the Emperor's soul merging with Inyad in the warp, creating something entirely new, neither human nor Eldari, but a force capable of standing against the Chaos gods. Whether such visions represent genuine prophecy or desperate hope remains unclear even to those who experience them. The Craftworld Eldari will likely attempt strategic interventions in the immediate aftermath of the Emperor's death. Certain human worlds that have proven useful or possess important resources might receive covert assistance, supplies, and intelligence delivered through webway portals before vanishing back into their hidden network. The Eldari have no love for humanity as a species, but they understand pragmatism. Some human populations might prove useful as buffer states, absorbing chaos incursions that would otherwise target Eldari holdings. Other worlds will be left to their fate, written off as acceptable losses in the greater game of survival. The Dark Elder of Comora view humanity's collapse with undisguised glee. The fall of the Imperium means an unprecedented supply of slaves, an endless bounty of souls to be harvested, tortured, and consumed to stave off Slaanesh's hunger. Raiding parties will emerge from the webway in numbers not seen since the fall, striking at vulnerable human worlds before disappearing back into their twilight realm. But even the Dark Elder must exercise caution. With the Imperium's collapse comes the spread of chaos, and chaos corrupts everything it touches. Slaves tainted by the warp make poor sustenance, their souls already claimed by darker powers. The Dark Eldar will need to move quickly, harvesting what they can before chaos claims too much of humanity's former territory. The Tau Empire watches humanity's decline with mixed emotions. They have studied humanity extensively, fought wars against the Imperium, attempted diplomatic overtures that were met with religious horror and military violence. Now they see the greatest civilization in the galaxy tearing itself apart. Some within the ethereal caste see opportunity for expansion, chance to bring the philosophy of the greater good to human worlds suddenly cut off from imperial authority. They envision human populations, desperate for stability and order, accepting Tau governance as preferable to the anarchy consuming their former empire. But the Tau are not naive. They understand that humanity's collapse threatens the entire galaxy. The chaos forces that overwhelm the Imperium will not stop at its borders. The warp storms and demonic incursions spreading from Terra will threaten Tau space as well. The shadow in the warp cast by approaching Tyranid hive fleets becomes more dangerous when there is no Imperial navy to intercept them in deep space. The Orquars that the Imperium kept partially contained will now rampage unchecked. The Tau face a terrible decision whether to attempt expansion into human space, risking overextension and encountering threats they are unprepared for, or to consolidate their holdings and hope the coming storm passes them by. The Necrons stir in their tomb worlds, their ancient sensors detecting the massive psychic disturbance of the Emperor's death. For beings who have existed in stasis for millions of years, the rise and fall of younger races holds limited interest. Yet some Necron dynasties have recognized humanity as a potential threat or useful tool in their own conflicts with Chaos and the Tyranids. The Silent King himself has been known to intervene in conflicts where humanity faces extinction, recognizing that organic life, for all its inferiority to the Necrons' eternal forms, provides something the Necrons lack. Living beings generate souls, psychic energy that influences the warp. The Necrons, soulless and eternal, can never access that dimension directly. Humanity's total extinction would leave the galaxy dominated by chaos, which even the Necrons recognize as an unacceptable outcome. Some Necron overlords might intervene to preserve isolated human populations, not out of mercy but cold calculation. These humans would become experiments, populations controlled and studied, their psychic potential monitored and possibly weaponized against the forces of chaos. Other dynasties will simply accelerate their existing plans for galactic domination, viewing humanity's weakness as opportunity to reclaim worlds that were theirs before the ancestors of humanity even existed. The ancient protocols of the Necron tier care nothing for the younger races and their petty empires. All will serve or be destroyed when the time of the Necrons returns. The Orcs respond to the Emperor's death with characteristic enthusiasm. They do not mourn the passing of the Yumi's big boss. They celebrate the opportunity for bigger, better fights. The fall of the Imperium means more worlds to loot, more enemies to crump, more territory to claim for the war. Orc war bosses across the galaxy sense the shift in the psychic gestalt of their species, the collective unconscious that links all greenskins. The Humies are weak now. Time to show them what a proper warg looks like. Yet even the orcs face complications. The spread of chaos from terror creates new enemies, demon worlds where even orcs hesitate to venture. The shadow in the warp cast by encroaching Tyrannid fleets disrupts the orcs' own psychic field, leaving their technology malfunctioning and their numbers without the gestalt intelligence that makes large orc forces so dangerous. And without the Imperium to fight against, some orc populations might actually decline. Orcs thrive on conflict, and the Imperium has provided reliable, worthy opponents for 10,000 years. Its sudden collapse removes that stabilizing force, potentially causing orc tribes to turn on each other in civil war when external targets become scarce. The Tyrannids represent perhaps the greatest long-term threat in the post-Emperor galaxy. The hive mind was drawn to the Milky Way by the Astronomicon, that psychic beacon blazing like a lighthouse in the void. With the Emperor's death, that beacon goes dark. The question becomes whether this will slow the Tyrannid advance or accelerate it. Some Imperial scholars theorize that the Tyrannids might lose interest in a galaxy that no longer broadcasts such a powerful psychic signature. But this hope is almost certainly false. The Tyrannids have already tasted the biomass of the Milky Way. They know it is rich with organic material. The hive fleets will continue their consumption, Astronomicon or not. What changes is the Imperium's ability to respond. Without the Astronomicon to guide ships, without astropathic communication to coordinate defense, without the centralized command structure that Terra provided, human worlds will face Tyrannid hive fleets alone. The shadow in the warp that precedes each fleet will isolate target worlds even more effectively than before. No calls for help will escape. No reinforcements will arrive. Each world becomes an island, facing extinction with whatever forces it has available. Some will survive through desperation and ingenuity. Most will be consumed, their populations rendered into biological slurry to feed the ever-hungry hive fleets. The Chaos Gods themselves respond to the Emperor's death with a mixture of triumph and frustration. They have spent 10,000 years trying to corrupt, destroy, or claim the anathema. His death should be their ultimate victory, proof that even the mightiest opponent of the ruinous powers cannot stand forever. Yet their triumph is incomplete. The Emperor does not simply die and fade into nothing. His soul, that vast accumulation of psychic power built over 40 millennia, does not dissipate harmlessly into the warp. It transforms, it changes. It becomes something else entirely. Each Chaos God has different interests in the aftermath. Khorne cares little for the political ramifications of humanity's fall. He cares only that the galaxy erupts in warfare on an unprecedented scale. The collapse of the Imperium means countless new conflicts, billions dying in battle, entire worlds consumed by violence. The Blood God feasts on this carnage, growing stronger with each soul claimed in his name. His demons pour through weakening reality wherever the fighting grows intense enough, claiming skulls for his throne and blood for his altar. Nurgle finds satisfaction in humanity's decay. The slow collapse of the Imperium mirrors the natural cycle of death and rebirth that the Plague God embodies. He watches with paternal fondness as once proud worlds fall into disease and despair, as populations that worshipped the Emperor as an immortal god now face the reality of their own mortality. Nurgle's gifts spread unchecked through populations that lack the Imperial infrastructure for quarantine and medical response. His plagues become pandemics. His demons walk openly among the dying, offering the comfort of surrender to those who can no longer bear the suffering. Tzeentch sees the Emperor's death as opportunity for unprecedented manipulation. The galaxy becomes a game board in flux, every piece in motion, every outcome uncertain. This is the architect of fate's ideal state. He weaves schemes within schemes, using demons and mortal agents to push events in directions that serve his inscrutable purposes. Perhaps he wants to prevent a new god from forming in the warp. Perhaps he wants to shape that god's formation to create an entity useful to his own plans. Perhaps he simply delights in the chaos itself, the infinite branching possibilities that emerge when humanity's greatest certainty, the immortal Emperor, proves mortal after all. Slaanesh, always the hungriest of the Chaos Gods, sees humanity's fall as an opportunity to claim what has been denied. The Eldari have hidden themselves away, their souls protected by their infinity circuits and careful discipline. But humanity has no such protections. When the Emperor's psychic shield falls, when his protection over humanity's collective soul ends, Slaanesh can feed freely on human excess and depravity. The Dark Prince's cult spread through the collapsing Imperium, offering pleasure and sensation to populations that face only suffering and death. Many will accept those gifts, not caring or not understanding the price their souls will pay. Yet for all the Chaos God's celebration, they face a problem. The Emperor's death might not strengthen them as much as they hope. Much depends on how that death manifests, what the Emperor becomes in that final moment. The Star Child theory, long dismissed by the Inquisition as heresy, suddenly becomes relevant. If the Emperor can reincarnate, if his soul can reform as something new, then Chaos faces not a victory but a transformation of the struggle into something unpredictable. The lore speaks of the Star Child as a fragment of the Emperor's compassion, the humanity he cast aside when he faced Horus on the Vengeful Spirit. That fragment has drifted in the warp for 10,000 years, slowly gathering strength, slowly forming into something that might one day be born. The Emperor's death could trigger that birth, releasing the restraints that kept the Star Child in its nascent state. What emerges might be a new god, neither Chaos nor the old Emperor, but something entirely unprecedented. A warp entity that embodies humanity's better nature, its capacity for hope and compassion and sacrifice, rather than hate and rage and despair. The Sensei, those immortal children of the Emperor scattered across the galaxy, suddenly find their purpose clear. They are psychic blanks, invisible to the warp, undetectable even by the Emperor himself. For millennia they have wandered, aware of their nature but uncertain of their role. Now that role becomes apparent. They are vessels, potential hosts for the Emperor's reborn consciousness. If the Star Child theory holds truth, the Sensei might gather in some predetermined location, drawn by instincts they don't fully understand, to facilitate their father's rebirth. The sacrifice of the Sensei, their combined life force offered up, could provide the anchor point the Star Child needs to manifest in the material realm. The Illuminati, that secret cabal of individuals who have faced chaos possession and survived, have prepared for this moment. They know truths about the warp that even the Inquisition refuses to acknowledge. They understand that gods are born from belief and sacrifice, that the Emperor was himself created by the mass suicide of ancient shamans who merged their souls to create a single powerful entity. That process could be repeated. The Sensei's sacrifice combined with the faith of trillions of humans who worship the Emperor might provide sufficient psychic energy to birth a new god. Not the old Emperor returned unchanged, but something evolved, adapted to the realities of the current galaxy. This new entity would face immediate challenges. The Chaos Gods will not permit a rival to form unopposed. They will assault the nascent god in the warp, trying to destroy or corrupt it before it can establish itself. The battle between the forming god and the ruinous powers will manifest as psychic storms across the galaxy, reality itself straining under the weight of such massive entities clashing. Populations on worlds near these storms will experience mass hallucinations, spontaneous mutations, reality itself seeming to shift and change as the warp bleeds through into real space. If the new god survives its birth, if it can establish itself as a stable entity within the warp, it will need to act quickly. Terra must be reclaimed. The webway breach must be sealed again, though this time not by one individual sitting on a throne, but through some new mechanism, perhaps warp-based rather than technological. The Astronomicon must be restored or replaced with some new form of navigation beacon. The scattered remnants of humanity must be contacted, coordinated, given hope that survival is possible, but the new god will not be the Emperor who created the Imperium. It cannot be. The Emperor was a creature of the Great Crusade shaped by war and conquest, willing to use any means necessary to secure humanity's survival. He suppressed his compassion to make the hard choices his position required. The Star Child represents what was lost in that suppression. A god born from the Star Child would retain the Emperor's power and knowledge but wield them with different priorities. It might value cooperation over conquest, see Xenos races as potential allies rather than threats to be exterminated, understand that humanity's survival depends on adapting to new realities rather than clinging to the failed certainties of the past. This philosophical shift would create its own problems. The Imperial Creed has spent 10,000 years building orthodoxy around the God Emperor's divinity and his eternal war against all threats to humanity. The priests of the ecclesiarchy will not easily accept a God that preaches tolerance and cooperation. Space Marine chapters founded on principles of eternal warfare against Xenos and heretics will struggle to comprehend a new directive that might involve alliances with Eldari or Tau. The Inquisition, dedicated to rooting out heresy in all its forms, will face the ultimate crisis of faith. Is the new God the Emperor returned, deserving of worship and obedience, or is it an impostor, a warp entity wearing the Emperor's face to corrupt and mislead humanity? Some factions will embrace the change. The more progressive elements of imperial society, those who have long questioned the wisdom of xenocidal policies and religious extremism, will see opportunity in the new God's perspective. Worlds that have secretly maintained contact with Xenos traders, or have populations of peaceful abhumans, will no longer need to hide. The rigid hierarchies of the old Imperium might give way to more flexible, adaptive structures that better suit the challenges of a galaxy where humanity is no longer the dominant power. Other factions will resist with every resource at their disposal. The most conservative Space Marine chapters will declare the new God heretical, possibly fragmenting into renegade warbands that continue to wage war according to the old ways, even as the rest of humanity evolves. Elements of the ecclesiarchy will preach that this is a test of faith, that the true emperor will return only after humanity proves its devotion by rejecting false gods and pretenders. Civil wars will erupt on worlds where populations divide over whether to accept or reject the new divine order. The alternative scenario, if the Starchild theory proves false or the rebirth fails, is far darker. Without the Emperor to hold back chaos, without any divine force rising to replace him, humanity faces extinction on a timescale measured in centuries rather than millennia. The species will not disappear overnight. Pockets of human civilization will survive in isolated regions, cut off from the broader galaxy, developing in isolation like the lost colonies of old night. But the Imperium as a unified entity, as a galaxy-spanning civilization, will be finished. Some of these isolated human populations might thrive in unexpected ways. Cut off from the ecclesiarchy's rigid dogma, free from the administratum's crushing bureaucracy, they could develop new forms of government and society more suited to their local conditions. Worlds that accept Xenos refugees or form alliances with nearby alien civilizations might build multicultural societies where humanity is one species among many, rather than the dominant power. These scattered human populations become seeds, potentially giving rise to new civilizations millennia hence, after the current age of chaos has passed. But most human worlds will suffer and die. The infrastructure that kept the Imperium functioning, that allowed billions to survive on worlds that could not naturally support such populations, will break down. Hive worlds will collapse into starvation and cannibalism as food shipments cease. Forge worlds will go dark as raw materials stop arriving. Mining colonies will be abandoned when there is no one to buy their ore. The death toll will be measured in the trillions, possibly the quadrillions, as the largest civilization the galaxy has ever known falls apart. The question of what happens to the Emperor's soul, regardless of whether the Starchild theory proves true, remains central to understanding the galaxy's future. That much psychic power cannot simply cease to exist. Energy of that magnitude must go somewhere, transform into something. Even if the Starchild fails to form properly, even if the Emperor does not reincarnate as a stable entity, his psychic essence will still influence the warp. It might fragment into countless smaller entities, lesser gods, or powerful demons that embody different aspects of his nature. It might be absorbed by the Chaos gods, strengthening them even as it changes their fundamental character, by introducing elements of order and control into their chaotic nature. Or perhaps something entirely unexpected occurs. The warp operates on principles that do not match material reality. Cause and effect become fluid. Time itself becomes negotiable. The Emperor's death in one moment might somehow influence events that occurred centuries before, creating temporal paradoxes and closed causality loops that reshape history itself. His consciousness might exist simultaneously across multiple points in time and space, fractured but still aware, still working to influence events even though the body on the Golden Throne has died. The galaxy that emerges from the Emperor's death will be fundamentally transformed. The old certainties, the structures and hierarchies that defined 10,000 years of history, will be gone. What replaces them depends on countless variables, on decisions made by individuals and factions across the stars, on whether humanity can adapt to new realities or clings to failed traditions until extinction claims them. The only certainty is that nothing will ever be the same. The Emperor's death marks an ending, yes, but also a beginning. The question is whether that beginning leads to humanity's final chapter, or to something unprecedented, a new age that might eventually be remembered as better than what came before. The wheel of history turns, empires rise and fall, gods are born and die and sometimes return in new forms. The galaxy moves toward whatever future awaits, carrying with it all the species and civilizations that struggle to survive within it. The Emperor's death is merely one moment in that vast sweep of time, terrible in its immediate impact but perhaps necessary for transformation, for evolution, for the possibility of something better emerging from the ashes of the old order.